Hi guys, today we're going to talk about test taking strategies. This far into the semester, many of you have already taken a couple of tests. You're starting to figure out what works and what doesn't work for you. So we're just going to go over a few other things that might help you, make you think of tests in a different way. Of course, testing is a part of academic life and it'll be a part of real life as well. There's always going to be some way to measure a skill or determine a readiness factor. Testing opportunities are learning opportunities. They're a way to apply what you know, they're a way to apply and figure out what you don't know. And then in this chapter, of course, we're going to talk about ways to prepare for tests. We're just going to draw a lot from that knowledge acquisition and memory lesson that we did a few weeks ago as well. This is what very typical test anxiety looks like, and it's important to understand that. Stress is a common factor, and our next lesson will be about stress management and how we can use that to our benefit. And then you study. The more you study, the more you're able to manage that stress and kind of keep that level down. And then, of course, you take the exam, right? But I want to be very, very clear that this is just kind of like a typical test anxiety. There, of course, actual diagnosed test anxiety, and that's a separate issue from what we're talking about on this slide. It is a psychological condition. Of course, you're going to feel distressed. You're going to feel maybe worried. It can interfere with your ability to recall knowledge, which is why those study skills and why we talk about studying so much and so often can help with that. Controlling some of it, again, this is typical test anxiety, not a diagnosed test anxiety, and that's important that we understand that difference. The biggest part is being prepared. The more prepared you are, the better you're going to have control over that stress level. Bouncing that bad vibes, remember going back to our growth mindset and making sure we're controlling that negative self-talk and trying to replace it with positive. Visualize your success, remembering that it's all about you. The biggest thing for me is having that plan and following it. So if you have a study schedule, stick to that study schedule. Be prepared for that exam. Eat well, sleep, and relax. That's all of our self-care, and that all affects how we recall information, especially that sleep part. It is really, really difficult. Your brain is a muscle like anything else. It needs to be rest and it needs to be exercised. And if it's not getting enough sleep, it's going to have trouble pulling that information. Remember, we encode it and then we recall it. It has trouble remembering what we encoded it as when our sleep isn't always there. Come early as you can so that you can feel prepared. You can take a minute to mentally prepare and then put it in perspective. And this is, I think, one of the most important pieces of it. Failing an exam can feel like the end of the world, but it is not the end of the world. You will not die from failing an exam, right? It might change some things for you. It might mean retaking a class. It might mean retaking the exam. It might mean doing extra work to bring the grade up to compensate for the exam. But at the end of the day, it is a learning opportunity. It is not the end of the world. It just might mean some adjustments. And sometimes, those hit us hard, and that's okay. I've had students that have not done well and they've had to spend more time in a learning lab, or they've had to adjust their study schedule to spend more time in the class, and all of that's okay. That's what a test is it a chance to see how your self-regulation is working and if you need to adjust it for that course. Again, this is test anxiety. If you're not sure, or if you know that you have a diagnosed test anxiety, which I just realized I misspelled on the slide, please make sure to use resources that are out there for you. We have a SAS department. When you have the live PowerPoint, if you pull that up, these links should be embedded there for you, and you can click and it'll walk you through. Of course, you've already done this part, right? So you'd start with their application from services. You can talk to somebody in the department. They will let you know what you need to do to get these accommodations. And then what happens is if approved, you get an accommodation letter that you can turn in your professor that gives you things. The biggest one that I see is the extra time. And so a lot of times you can take your test in the testing center instead of trying to complete it all in the class. Or if you have a timed exam, since we're all online, it'll allow those things to be removed so that you can take as much time as you need. Some of us just take longer to process information, and it's hard to do in the hour, 20 minutes. That's a normal test time for a class. So if you think you need them, if you're not sure, reach out and find out. because if you do need them, then that's an important service that you should have. All right, other ways to study, and please, please, please do not cram. This is going back to the memory. We know cramming, you might remember it, it might squeak you through a test. And then what do you do when you get that cumulative final? You're restudying everything that you know. Cramming is not an effective study tool because we know how memory works. It needs a lot of repetition. So set goals and manage your time. I'll say it 100 times till I'm blue in the face. Have your study schedule on your calendar and stick to it. Remember your personal learning preferences and strengths. So if you're a visual learner, take the time to take your notes and make it into something visual, whether it's a mind map or something that will help you study, flashcards, anything that helps your strengths. If you need to move while studying. Use flashcards and walk around the house if that's something that helps you. Use those learning preferences that we talked about. Use those memory strategies that we talked about. Remember, we talked about things like chunking, connecting the information to things that we know. Any of those from that chapter, use those. And ones that work for you, use them. If they don't work, stop using them. Of course, we talked about the importance of listening and note taking and that active listening, so that you can really pay attention, strategies to do that. Then how to put them in your notes where you're not just dictating what the professor says, but capturing those key terms, making room for your questions and for elaboration. And then finally, those reading strategies. We just went through all this last week. That again, active reading strategies, highlighting, taking notes, asking questions using the SQ3R method so that you're getting more information instead of just blindly reading it and then never looking at the information again. So you should study every day. Remember, we talked about smaller amounts of time on a daily, regular basis. Merge your class notes and textbooks to notes. That's called a master set of notes, and that should be notes from everything that you did. Reading class notes, if you go to the Learning Lab, if you use a YouTube resource like Khan Academy, all those notes you should be able to put into one master set that you can use for a test review. What does it mean to you? Visualize yourself using the material. How are you going to use it? If you're a nerd like me, I like to color code the crap out of some stuff. Do that. If you don't, then don't waste your time. And then use the notes to test yourself, right? This is where we check our knowledge. So either rewrite your notes. I have students that set their master set a note and rewrite and see how much they can pull, so then they can compare and see what they're missing. Or you can just elaborate them, or you can actually write out a practice test and test yourself. Some of your professors may even give you practice tests or reviews that you can use. Set your notes aside and practice with that, and then go back and check your notes. So quick little mind map actually of test success. Things like studying the course by unit. This is why we don't cram, because you're not studying the course by unit. You're studying every single unit your test is going to be over. Take some time, study it. And then when you're ready to move on to the next unit, make a review for this unit and then start studying the second unit so that you're still coming back to the unit before and moving on to the next one. We just talked about making a study plan. Hammer that into your calendar. Anticipate exam questions. You should be able, especially after your first exam, you've kind of gotten a feel for the professor and the course, to start anticipating, especially if you're fortunate enough to give a review. Use that to make test questions. Attend any review sessions. A lot of your classes will have review sessions. They will use resources like supplemental instruction, that you'll want to use that, which is just basically a group tutoring session with a student that's taken the class before. And then, of course, if you don't have any of that and you still feel like you need a review session, go to the Learning Lab. Have them work with you as you go through your notes. You might even meet a tutor that's taken the class or taught the class. Make flashcards, consistent study times. That's going back to your study plan. And then take breaks. Remember, we talked about our brain will give up on us. If you can read for 20 minutes and then your brain starts to wander, take a 5-minute break and come back to it. Whatever it is, it's going to work for you. And again, this is another reason cramming doesn't work. Study in groups, but make sure that your groups are study groups and not social groups. I love being with my friends, but not all of them can I study with because we can't stay on track. So be really, really careful about that. So that's part of this think small and go for quality. It's really hard to study in large groups. There's just too many voices, too many things pulling you away. Look for people who kind of study the same way you do, just because that's going to help you as you develop study tools, notes. You want to meet regularly because we're studying regularly, right? Um, Define an agenda and have objectives. So this might be something as simple like we talked about if you're studying by unit. Just know, okay, we're going to meet on Wednesday and we're going to study unit 1, and then we'll meet again on Friday. We'll review unit 1 and start on unit 2. It doesn't have to be formal, but just kind of have a plan. If you have follow-up work, depends on if it makes sense for your study group and your class, assign that, make sure you get it done. And then if you really need something formal, and you don't have to be this formal, but you can kind of rotate roles if that's what you need. So discussion leader, maybe you have somebody volunteer each week to bring something that they read from their notes that they have a question that your group can discuss, depending on the class. You've got different kinds of tests, and I'm sure you've seen pretty much all of these. Pre-assessment, so if you have a math class, you usually do this in the beginning so that they can measure your baseline knowledge and make sure you're in the appropriate math course. Formative, quizzes, things like that. You will have classes that have regular or weekly quizzes, and it's exactly what this is, to make sure you know the material before moving on. That's going to help you identify a gap in the knowledge before you're deep into the second unit. Or the following unit, and you're completely lost. And then, of course, summative, you're going to have your midterms and finals. These are the large portion of material, and these are the ones that probably stress us out the most because they're going to be bigger and they're going to require more from you. They're going to use those higher thinking skills that we talked about from Bloom's taxonomy, that creative, that analyzing, that evaluating, and really want to show what you know. So everything that you're doing with your study plan should be building up to these kinds of exams. I'm sure you've used all of these, and especially right now, you're especially learning electronic or online exams if you've never done them before. You'll see all of these. Right now, our course is doing open book and electronic. So sometimes that's helpful, and sometimes if you don't look at the material before the test, you're going to spend way too long on the test. Typically, what I do for my online exams is I do open book but time, so that you have to have a strategy before you can just open up the test. Did not do that this semester. You might have take home, which is another one that those tests tend to be, usually your open book and take home usually tend to be a lot harder because you get to use the materials, right? So there's a higher expectation of what you're going to be putting in there. Paper tests you're probably used to taking in class, and you've seen those. Some require Scantrons and some don't. It's important to know if you need to bring a Scantron with you. Oral tests, you'll see speech is a very common one where you're preparing a speech, right? Or something that you're going to present in front of a class. All of these have different strategies, electronic and online. It's important to know what to expect, right? Electronic and online, it's important to know your technologies. I'm sure you're all having a crash course in learning right now. What kind of technology do you have? Do you have good Wi-Fi? Do you have a reliable device to make sure that you can do this going forward? When we move to back to our more traditional format, it's important to know if you're going to take another online course, how they do their exams, so that you can make sure you have the equipment that you need. So test taking strategies, this is super important before, during, and after. Before you go, you're studying as you go. You're collecting and organizing those resources. Those are your notes, right? Anything that your professor gives you, handouts, links to other websites that'll help you have all of that together. Making those study aids and a practice test. And then, like we talked about, sleeping and eating, having the necessary material. So know if you need a Scantron, know if you're allowed to have notes and you can bring notes or not, know if everything needs to be done in a certain black ink pencil or pen, all of that before you go. Because if you walk in and you find out that you're missing a resource that you need for the test, it's just going to throw off your game, right? It's going to bring that stress level, like, just to jump it up. During the test, take a minute to scan and see what it covers. Go to the ones that you know and knock those out so you can spend more time on the other ones. But also plan your time, right? Don't spend so much time writing out every single thing you know on one answer that you don't get time to tackle the one that you needed a little bit more time on. So be smart about it. Be strategic. Maybe go through the ones you know if they're essay questions and write, exactly, like, start with what you know, go handle the hard ones, and then come back to them if you have time. Of course, easy questions, come back to the harder ones. Make sure you read them. A lot of students miss my questions because they're usually two-part. I have you describe or define a thing, and then I have you apply it to something in your class, and a lot of people miss my and then part. Um, and this is always fun. Plan your time, but don't rush. So it's kind of a balance. So making sure you're keeping an eye on the clock, but don't get caught up in it, so that you can get and give yourself enough time to address all the different parts of the test that you need to. And then, of course, check your work. Go back and reread them, but only change the answers if it makes sense. And this is what gets hard because we always doubt ourselves. So if you're thinking you need to change your answer, make sure it really makes sense, because a lot of times the first one is right, and then we start doubting ourselves. And then after, first of all, reward yourself. You did it. Continue to stick to your study schedule. The biggest thing about after is reviewing your tests, looking for those errors. Again, test or learning opportunities. Whether you do amazing or whether you tank it, it is a learning opportunity to that self-regulation we talked about at the beginning of this lecture. What needs to change, if anything? Is it you've been studying with a group and you bomb that test, and then you go back and think, well, every time I study with my group, we get caught up and we start talking about, ABC, or we always cut out early when I don't really think we should, and then change your group or maybe study alone. Do you need to use resources? We have academic coaching that helps with test prep or understanding our textbook or note taking, or is it the content area and you just didn't understand it as well as you thought? And then we have learning lab tutors for that. This is your chance to figure out that self-regulation from our strategic learning model and what you need to do to help with your next test. All right, so here's some strategies. These are also in the textbook, so I don't want to spend a lot of time. Just little strategies for different types of tests, because you're going to get all different kinds as you go through different college courses. So, of course, multiple choice, you're going to start off with that process of elimination. Mark out the ones you absolutely know aren't right, and then look for key terms. Circle in the question, circle the thing that you think is significant that will help you determine the answer, so that if it, which one of these is not, then circle that not, so it'll help you remember as you're reading the answers what you're looking for. True, false is going to be pretty similar. Always look for those words, never, always, ever, none, and not, to help you determine that correct answer. I mean, these questions, you kind of have a 50-50 shot, right? So look for those cues, and then restate it as a positive, and does it make it sound more true or false? Okay. Matching, these ones are the one where you have two columns and you try to match. So this is another process of elimination. Start with the ones you absolutely know, so you can take those off, and then start looking for each phrase to find the one that best suits it. Look for different ways to match it by grouping them or parts of speech. And we talked about it. And then mark off all the items you already know, so you can easily see. That's what always gets caught up in matching, is sometimes there's just too much on the page. So however you can mark out and write on your test to take out what you don't need to look at anymore and concentrate, so you can concentrate on the ones that you are having a harder time with. Short answer, this is really popular. You will see this a lot. The answers are designed for specific information. So try to understand what exactly the instructor is asking for you. This is a good place to underline in the question things to kind of point out what you think are being asked of you. So again, in mine, I always ask and then, that a lot of people miss. So that would be a chance to underline it, so you remember to do the first part and come back to the second part. And then good old essay questions. So this goes back to our writing strategies. Of course, you don't have the time to do all of the parts of our writing strategies, right? The planning and drafting, but you should treat it pretty similar. I would say write out, like on the side somewhere, if you have scratch paper, a quick outline that helps keep you organized as you start writing in the test. You still want to try to aim for an introduction and a conclusion. Everything's just going to be a lot shorter than what you're used to. Read the question carefully, and this is another place to underline those keywords to help keep you focused. And then write neatly. If you have to handwrite some of our English essays, you have to handwrite. And I don't know why they do that anymore, because that makes my hands hurt thinking about it, but you do. So try to Space out your time so that your hand's not getting so tired so you can write neatly. And then just make sure you answer all parts of the question. A lot of essay questions are going to have multiple things that they're asking you because they're giving you more time to write. So make sure you answer all of them. And if you have the time, you can do that with a quick outline. They also use words. They are very much, essay questions are very much living in the world of those higher level Bloom's taxonomy thinking and learning. So things like compare, contrast, critique, define, discuss, explain, all of these words, that's what they want you to do. So they do not want you usually to just regurgitate what you read. They want you to analyze it, compare. What do you think about it? What does it mean? Do you agree or disagree, and why? And then here we go, back to evaluating your test. Where were those errors? If you didn't do well, was it your study prep? Was it preparing for the test? Was it focused? And did you give yourself enough time? Did you get caught up on one question and forget to go back to the rest of them? Did you struggle with the time that you had and maybe talk to your professor about that? And then I always tell students, did you just have a bad day? Did you wake up? Maybe you didn't sleep. Maybe you woke up and you had like a flat tire and you couldn't get on time and it was raining and it just was a bad day before the test. Sometimes that affects our test, and sometimes you can leave that bad day where it is. If you go back and you look through the test and you're like, I knew all this, I just couldn't focus because I was having a bad day, leave it there and move on. Figure out what you can do to compensate for the points. Don't carry that with you. Sometimes we just have bad days. If it's content areas, talk to your professor, talk to a learning lab tutor. They can help you make those connections you might be missing. And then, of course, mechanical errors. Did you rush? We all have a tendency to rush through the test, do one pass, turn it in, and then realize that we didn't really read the questions and understand what they were asking us. And now we know the next test to slow down. Quickly on academic integrity, don't cheat. That's the short version. Of course, there's ethical, it's not. But you just don't learn from that. You paid to learn. You paid to learn a skill or an area, a discipline to do something with it. So why wouldn't you want to learn what you could? You do risk failing the course or being expelled. Our policies are dependent by the department, and they can range anywhere from a 0 on the exam to getting kicked out of the course, to getting escalated to the Dean of Student Services, to being expelled from Austin Community College. Of course, it'll cause more stress. You're throwing away time and money, just like we talked about. You're here to learn something specific that's going to help you in your next phase of your life. So you want to learn that. And then, of course, how it does have negative effects on your feelings of your integrity and your feelings of self. These are all areas that are considered academic dishonesty. Plagiarism's kind of the big one. Pulling stuff off the internet and putting in your paper without citing it, whether it was on purpose or an accident, that is a academic dishonesty issue. Any sort of cheating, and I've seen a lot of things, bringing in notes when you're not supposed to, all of that stuff can likely get you, like I said, a minimum a 0 on that exam, probably a 0 in the course. Probably they're going to give you an F. Anything that gives you obtaining an unfair advantage. So if you see the test before test day and you're not supposed to, that's an unfair advantage. Anything that kind of fabrication line, any sort of aiding and abetting. So you might not be cheating, but you're helping the person next to you cheat off you, aiding and abetting. Falsification. So again, that kind of fabrication, anything that you lie, made up. So making up a quote for a paper just because it supports your argument. It's not plagiarism because you didn't steal it from somebody, but you definitely made it up. That's falsification and fabrication. And then again, any sort of unauthorized access. So if you get access to a test somehow, whether it's from a student that took it a semester before, maybe you get an hourly position somewhere that gives you access and you use that, it's still considered academic dishonesty. It'll still, usually at a minimum, you'll have to meet with the Dean of Student Affairs and discuss it, and there might be some consequences, discipline, everything from failing the course to suspension, getting expelled, any of those number of things. All right, guys, that's all I have for test prep. Thanks so much.